消除一切形式种族歧视国际公约 ICERD 从有意签署到最后决定暂搁签署，当中引起了部分马来党团叫嚣，并于12月8号在吉隆坡举办反ICERD集会，群起抗议。以签署 ICERD 会威胁宪法153条文赋予马来人特殊地位为由，反对签署公约。联合国在1965年推动拟定的 ICERD 是为了回应全球的种族歧视问题，但在我国签署公约与否，却赤裸裸地展现了族群之间根深蒂固的互不信任。新盟政府在捍卫人权承诺上出现动摇，面对巫裔群体的不安感，政府该如何应对？新盟政府誓言打造各族平等的新马来西亚。ICERD 是否真的会威胁宪法153条文？而签署公约是否为打造公正与和谐社会的重要之举？
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest episode of On the Hot Seat. I am your program moderator, Lee Chin, tonight. First of all, let's welcome two guests tonight, Latheefa Koya from Lawyers for Liberties and Aidil Khalid from Concerned Lawyers for Justice. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know both of you have very different stance on the issue of ICERD. Before we go into that, a little bit of housekeeping note for all of our audience, whether you're a first-timer or all-timer, it will serve as a reminder. So during the program, you're welcome to post your questions in the comment section, and my producer, if they deem that it's appropriate or suitable, more likely suitable, depending on the flow of the program, they will actually post it, and we'll let both of our guests address the questions that our audience have. Okay, so without further ado, maybe we can start with the rally last weekend. So Aidil, I saw from your Facebook that you were there, you participated in the rally. So can you just share a little bit about the rally?
Yeah, I was there, but only around the Masjid Jami' station area. I was there around, I think, 3 something.
Ah, okay.
It was so crowded, it was full, so I couldn't actually go to the Dataran Merdeka area. So, and I couldn't really hear what was being spoken by those who gave speech, because they were far away in the Dataran
organizers
Merdeka.
Or okay.
But for those in the vicinity of the Masjid Jami' area, we have our own. There were some who chanting and singing to defend the federal constitution, the privileges of the Malays and also the natives of Sabah and Sarawak and so on and so forth. So I would have to say that I was actually surprised with the turnout because at the very beginning, it all started off with, if my memory serves me right, with an EXCO member of the Bar Council, Luqman Sharif Alias, who alerted some of the NGO leaders about the move to ratify ICERD. So in the beginning, when I was discussing with Luqman Sharif, the concern was it would be difficult to make the public to understand, because this is an international treaty, there are legal arguments. So our concerns was the people on the grounds might have difficulty to understand. But I guess the rally proves otherwise.
So you do think that people who participated in the rally actually understand the treaty itself?
They might, I cannot say all of them understand, but they might understand the message. I mean, what are what affects them, I think.
Latheefa, you were not at the rally, right?
Obviously not.
I don't know, maybe as an observer or whatever.
I did observe. I was watching live. They were showing it through Astro Awani.
Yes,
which
yes,
is a
yes.
big deal because we've never seen live
rallies
before this new government. So I think that's the first, I must say. And so they had this, showing every angle where the crowd is.
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
It was a good rally. It was, I would say, relatively peaceful, and it was well organized. For that, I give them kudos. But as far as content is concerned, I don't think the participants understood what it was all about, nor did the organizer, or they chose not to understand what the issue is.
Okay. Were you surprised with the turnout of the?
No, in fact, at the rate it was going, it was given full thumbs up by the authorities. So there's nothing to fear because normally, I mean, I have been organizers of rallies before.
Yes.
And also participated. So there's always the fear there's number of people who would come.
Yeah.
And especially when you don't have the support of the government and you're protesting something which is deemed very sensitive to the government. So people may be afraid of being arrested, beaten and things like that. So none of those fears were there. So it's just a matter of whether they can mobilize or not. And knowing who are behind the organizing thing, the main groups were also involving political parties.
Yes.
And that is PAS and UMNO. I was quite confident that they were able to mobilize, especially PAS. But what happens after that is another issue. But them organizing the rally was no surprise. But of course, they said they will bring about 500,000.
Yes.
And there's all this, competition as to who is right. So between 55, 80, and 500,000, which was claimed by Zahid Hamidi, I think it would be safe to say about 50. But then, who knows?
Yeah. But it's okay because in most of the rallies we can only have like a estimation of the numbers.
It's not even an estimation. It's a guesstimation because everybody are guessing.
Yes. Everyone would have their own. The organizers, the police, and everybody. So we tend to not actually. In the end, we don't report the total number of. We just quote it from.
Or underquote sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, maybe not under. Yeah, but we have to quote it from some parties.
Right.
So, but at least we saw a very successful rally in terms of how it's being mobilized, how it's being organized, and how it ended. We don't see anything like anything unhappy.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that, of course, yes, that we have to give it to them. But now we have to come to the cost of the rally itself, ICERD. I'm just actually, it's very interesting to read all these comments or actually some of the opposition that people have on ICERD. We will address it now because it seems that those who attend the rally or those who proclaim to support the cause of anti-ICERD has this fear of upon rectification, ICERD would actually threaten certain things. So maybe now we can explore whether all these fears are substantiated. So one of it is like, the first question that it's like, it will threaten Article 153 of Federal Constitution, in particular to the special position of Malay. I know that Aidil, you are actually opposing ICERD, the rectification of ICERD. Maybe we can start with you. Do you think that it actually threatens Article 153 of Federal Constitution?
First of all, I would like to set the record straight.
Yes,
the issue should not be focused merely on Article 153, but unfortunately that is how people are talking about it. Because if you look at the contents of ICERD and then you look into the contents of our federal constitution, there are actually several, not just Article 153, there are several provisions that does not go hand in hand. First of all, we must understand that the ICERD is International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination.
Yes.
If you look at the title, of course, nobody would object to such a call to eliminate any form of racial discrimination.
Yes.
But as the saying goes, the devils are always in the details. So we need to look into the details. And if we look at the provision of ICERD, Article 1, the definition of racial discrimination is so wide that it shall mean any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race. So there cannot be any form of distinction or preference. So now this is the definition given. It is not just discrimination that is taking away rights of the others, but any form of distinction. So if you look at the Federal Constitution, first of all, we have Article 8, Clause 5, Clause F, which is about the Malay regiment, which is restricted to the Malays. So this article of ICERD goes against the Malay regiment. And then we have Article 89 of the Federal Constitution, which is on the Malay Reserve Land. Article 90 of the Federal Constitution, which is on the customary land in Negeri Sembilan and Perak, and also Malay holdings in Terengganu. And then we have Article 153, as you mentioned, on the special positions of the Malays and natives of Sabah and Sarawak, and the legitimate interests of the other communities. And then we have Article 160 on the definition of Malay being tied with being a Muslim. So that also would be problematic under ICERD, because when we tie the identity of the Malay to be Muslims, the Committee Against Racial Discrimination under ICERD might deem that as discrimination. And then we have Article 161A, Clause 5 of the Federal Constitution on the Sabah and Sarawak native land. So there are so many provisions that are in question here. So because of that, it is not just, I wouldn't say that it is a fear, it is definitely an objection, because we all accept that the Federal Constitution is the highest law of the Federation. So the government shouldn't go into something that is clearly and manifestly against so many provisions of the highest law of our country.
Latheefa, do you think of all the sections or legislation that Aidil have quoted just now?
The articles.
Yeah, the articles that he has quoted just now. Do you think it go against ICERD?
Absolutely not. What he has, Aidil has listed out are what you call special position of the Malays, and that's why the manifestation of that special position you can see on the Malay Reserve Land, Malay Regiment, these are put in the Constitution, and I still don't see what is the conflict, because those things are actually recognized within ICERD as part of choosing a certain ethnic group, and I still don't see where the problem is. They have yet to convince any of us that when you talk about ICERD, therefore all these positions or all these articles will be affected. How? You haven't shown us. And in fact, when you say that the Article 160, where it says about Malays means also those who profess or practice as Muslim,
Yes.
it will be seen as Malays. So what's the problem? I still don't see a problem. In fact, it enhances the point that it's less discriminatory, because you actually accept beyond just being a Malay, but also someone who professes religion will be seen as Malay. So I don't see any problem. I still have yet to see. You can list out more than 153, but the point is whether having Malays as a preferred or having a special position within Malaysia doesn't affect ICERD at all. And if it does, what is it? We haven't seen it yet. So I'm yet to be shown what it is.
I don't know how to explain. I mean, if you look,
that's the problem.
you look at the definition of racial discrimination.
Yes, yes.
There cannot be any distinction. This is, I'm reading Article 1, word for word. Any distinction, any exclusion, any restriction or preference on racial and on race, color, descent, and so on and so forth.
Of course they can
So
be.
how can this definition, which is so wide?
But this is a universal accepted values, isn't it? We can't discriminate any people because of race, religion, colors of skins.
I would agree. If we discriminate, we shouldn't discriminate anybody if that discrimination is denying them their right. I would agree to that. However, what we have in our constitution, which we should all agree upon, is something else. I mean, if we read the Article 153, the wordings is very clear. The special position of the Malays, the wording of special position is already against Article 1, very clear. Special position of the Malays. And the legitimate interests of other communities. So it does not actually discriminate if it does not deny the rights of the other communities. But unfortunately, Article 153 is not in compliance with Article 1 of ICERD. That is the problem.
So that's your take. Article 153 is not in compliance with ICERD. But there is actually Article 1 sub 4 of ICERD, which says that you can actually give preferential treatment, correct me if I'm wrong, to narrow the gap between races, right?
Yes.
So doesn't that actually provide for a provision for the special position of Malay?
Yes. Article 1.4 can only be invoked. I mean, the wordings are very clear. Can only be invoked on 3 conditions. First, it is for the adequate advancement of a racial group. I mean, if you want to help, for instance, the orang asli, I mean, no problem. Second, the measures cannot lead to maintenance of special rights. These are the wordings of Article 1.4. It cannot lead to maintenance of special rights. What we have, for instance, on the Malay Reserve land, that is a maintenance of special rights. And then must be abolished after the objectives, i.e. the adequate advancement have been achieved. So meaning, Article 1, if the proponents are saying that Article 1.4 allows for Article 153, are they saying that Article 153 one day should be abolished? So that is the question. And even so, Article 8 on the Article 89 on the Malay Reserve land, it is there it is not for any objective other than to maintain the status quo of the Malay Reserve land. So it does not satisfy the conditions of 1.4.
Latheefa, what do you
Absolutely not. First of all, what is the definition of racial, the first definition that you brought under ICERD is just a definition. You don't go and say that the whole convention is about definition. Then you go to the various clauses. And like you said, clauses 1.4 and 2.4 talks about and recognizes the very idea of affirmative action.
Yes.
And it also says that you have to abolish when it reaches. But go back to what is 153. 153 recognizes the fairness and the justice while recognizing the special position of the Malays and Bumiputra. Where does it say? Because one is about special position, but in preparing for that, in exercising that, they can allow for quotas and whatever license and all that for Malays. Of course, it looks like discrimination, but it says while doing that, you cannot discriminate other races. That's within 153. So what is it that we're talking about? Are we saying, those who are saying that ICERD is in conflict with 153, that is not what the proponents of ICERD is saying. In fact, we're saying it is in tandem, it is in line with ICERD. 153 are those who are objecting ICERD saying 153 is discriminatory. Are you saying 153 is racist? I'm not saying that, nor are the proponents of ICERD saying that. So to put words into those who are pushing for ICERD is actually pretending or not understanding what the issue is. Affirmative action, of course, is not limited to 153. Reserve land and all that has got a history and why it is there. And no one who talks about ICERD is talking about removing this article, because we don't see any problem with that. And if there is a problem, what do? We have, affirmed or ratified various other international conventions. Yes. And there are others, there are clauses that may be seen as conflicting with our own laws. What do? That's where the idea of reservation comes in. So if you have a problem, then you can reserve. But to say and object completely on an international convention against racism, it's not only embarrassing, but it's outright, denying the fact that what we're doing is wrong, because you're part of an international community, and you are saying that you are so unique, as if the rest of the world who signed it does not have their own constitution, does not have higher laws or laws that they would consider supreme. We're not the only country with a constitution. South Africa has constitution. In fact, their constitution is far more tighter and far more higher. They even have a constitutional court. But they signed ICERD. Does that mean they're undermining their constitution? What is so special that you can't do it? Other countries also have affirmative action on various grounds. I don't see any problem. It looks like this was a good reason to make issue for me. This is a good distraction. It is not a real issue. As you can see, so many people were interviewed. They don't know what they are going there for. But they were told and they were filled with insecurities by saying, if you sign this ICERD, you will lose your rights. And that for me is dishonest, and it was wrong to do that. So, until those who are pushing to say that ICERD should not be signed come out clearly and say it without just listing out over and over again and saying, oh, so Islam and Malays are the same, therefore I think it's better for ICERD. How is it the opposite? It makes no sense. We can't see it because 153 is actually drafted in such a way. They made sure that they are not discriminatory. So what's the problem? So it's just created to create that anxiety and insecurity, which is perfect setting for the opposition.
So what you're trying to say that is the current legal framework and the way that Article 153 is being drafted, it's already in tandem with
Yes.
ICERD.
Yes.
We are ready to sign ICERD at any time,
Yes.
which I know that you don't agree, Aidil. I think one thing that you raised just now is about the reservation. Do you think the reservation is not good enough to actually protect whatever that, it's contradicting with ICERD?
Okay.
As in our,
Before I go into the reservation, I just want to respond on one
Sure.
issue that has been raised by Latheefa on the issue that this is an international treaty, therefore we shouldn't act as if we are so special. But we must understand that the position of international law is that all countries are free, whether or not they want to join the treaty or not. In fact, under ICERD, so the proponents of ICERD are saying that we should accept ICERD. Under ICERD Article 21, it says that a state party may denounce this convention. So that right is given. So there's no issue of being embarrassed just because we are saying that, no, we do not want this convention because it goes against certain provisions of our constitutional compromise. Now, that is first. Secondly,
that's a very interesting argument. Okay, yes, come.
And
yes,
then,
second.
Because within the ICERD itself, it gives the right.
Yeah.
And then second is taking examples of other countries' constitution and so on and so forth. I mean, that is not an apple-to-apple comparison. The constitutional compromise that we had is not similar to those of other countries, so we cannot take that as a comparison. Going back to your question on reservations. Now, this has been the argument of the proponents saying that it's not a problem, we just sign, we can reserve and so on and so forth. First, let us look into Article 20 of ICERD. Article 20 says that a reservation incompatible with the object and purpose of this convention shall not be permitted. So that if it goes to the very object and purpose of that convention, it cannot be reserved. In fact, other state parties can object if our reservation goes against the object of the convention. And also, in reading international treaties, the law that we need to refer to is the International Convention, the Vienna Convention on the Laws of Treaties. It also reiterates the same thing. It says that a state party intending to join a convention cannot reserve if it goes against the very object and purpose. Now, what is the object and purpose of ICERD? We have to go to the definition, because that definition is the very provision that gives meaning to the other provisions. The definition is provided, as I said just now, Article 1.4, that any distinction, any preference cannot be there. So that is the problem. Now, Latheefa keep on saying that Malay, Muslim and so on.
You were the one who said it, I'm just referring to it.
No, because you said if Malay is tied, being Muslim is better. Now let us take examples.
It's better for ICERD, I said.
Let us take examples of other countries that have signed ICERD. Qatar, for instance, they have signed. And then what they have been facing during their review is that the CERD, the Committee Against Racial Discrimination under ICERD, is calling upon Qatar to actually amend their Sharia laws on the right of non-Muslims to have wills, to receive wills. So this is against Sharia law.
Is it against Sharia law?
No. It is against the administration of Sharia law. Whether or not a non-Muslim can receive wills and so on and so forth from a Muslim. That is something for the Islamic scholar to debate. I'm not going to debate on that. But it is clearly going against the administration of Sharia law currently as practiced in Malaysia, which falls under the purview of the states, not even under the federal government. And then Saudi. Saudi is not a state that I would want to follow. But let's just look at the example of Saudi. Saudi ratified ICERD with the reservation that it does not go against Sharia. And then what are the recommendations given by the committee during the review? The recommendation is that for Saudi to just take away the reservation. So that is the problem. The moment you ratify, even with reservation, the pressure would be there. Malaysia have ratified CEDAW. CEDAW is a convention against the discrimination on women. We made several reservations. However, the problem is that what are the calls made by Sohakam recently in the UPR, the Human Rights Committee in Geneva? They are calling for Malaysia to take away that reservation on the principles of Sharia. So that is the problem. The moment we signed, the pressure would keep on going.
Well, I think that's a contradiction in what you just said, because you said no country should be pressured under the Article 21 of the ICERD. You know, you can't force anybody, you can denounce. And then the next minute you say the pressure is up. So which is which? But coming back to the reservation, if you reserve, you have to be specific. And if you reserve, they did say that it cannot go against the core purpose of the convention. So, for example, if I reserve, I sign, I ratify the convention, but I reserve saying that I reserve because we have a law against only Chinese or something, for example. But that's a clear discrimination.
Yes.
So that goes against the whole purpose, right? So what did Qatar do? If they have a discrimination against non-Muslims for will, for example, that's a clear discrimination. Whether it's Sharia or whether it's not Sharia, the point is that's a clear discrimination. So if you cannot iron out that discrimination, your reservation becomes a subject for discussion. What was the reservation for Saudi? Of course, the pressure is up, because the question that was asked to the Saudi government is that they put a general reservation. They said, we will sign so long as we reserve, so long as it doesn't affect the Sharia law. That's it. They were not specific as to which Sharia law, what does Sharia law mean. So they said you have to be more specific. You can't give a general reservation. That is the kind of reservation that will come up for discussion. Let's go back to Malaysia. If Malaysia say we have a reservation because we have this law, right? And that would be all the articles that you talk about Malay Reserve. By having those articles, does that discriminate the Chinese or Indians? That is the question that we'll be asking, right? That will be where the committee of the convention will be asking. And if you show that there is no discrimination, by all means, keep the reservation. And in fact, they will say no need for reservation because that's there. That is how the discussion of international treaty comes about. Look, you can't kid people by talking about something so general. The reality is this: 170 over countries have signed, and out of that, 50 over countries are Muslims. We talk about Sharia, we talk about this and that, and talk about special position. This is 179 countries with 170 different cultures, traditions, different laws, different backgrounds, and different history. Are you saying that when they signed all this convention, they're all the same? No, they're not. We are talking about core principles of that convention, where they have taken into account all these things, that every country has got different traditions and cultures. So in that context, Malaysia is one of many, many countries who have got their own unique characters. But what the difference is that we cannot have a country who wants to be part of the international community, who wants to trade with other civilized countries, and say we can still discriminate minorities. It's the same goes if say France or any other country comes out and say that we will say all Malays cannot come near Eiffel Tower, for example. And what will we be doing? Sitting there and saying that's French, they are unique, they're special, they're a sovereign country. No, I'm sorry. That is where we will jump and say, you signed ICERD, you better stick to it. So it's not just about putting this false thing that this is about Malay rights or Islam. This thing is this. It looks like you have no real reasons to oppose ICERD, but you jumped on it because it feels like it gives the impression that the Malay rights will be gone. When you actually look at it, it's not there. So why did the Arab countries sign it? Why did they sign it? Because of Israel. So some of the leaders said, oh, but it's different. Arab countries signed because they are opposing Israel and they want to force Israel to on their Zionism and on the discrimination, right? And Africa signed because they are against apartheid. I thought Malaysia likes to look at itself as a Muslim country or a Muslim majority country or Islamic state, whatever you call it, as part of the country that has been condemning Israel. Why are you then now getting out of that equation and saying, oh, the Muslim countries will sign ICERD because they are against Israel. African countries are signing because of apartheid. But we are special. We are neither this nor that. Where is that morality, that moral authority for us to speak out when we see discrimination or an oppression against minority in the world? So for me, you cannot go out there and take the megaphone and talk about Palestine or Rohingya when you can't even sign, because you sound like North Korea to me. You sound like Myanmar to me. So we need to move forward. I don't think ICERD is the most important policy right now. But because of the way this has gotten the debate, I think it's important for the government to start correcting the wrong impression, the false narrative that was given by the organizers of the rally. And I will continue to say that they were lying, and they continued to say that ICERD was against the federal constitution. No one has come out clearly to show how it is in conflict. They will list out 10 times over this series of articles, but they fail to show how it is in conflict.
I'm glad that Latheefa raised the issue of Israel. The point that we need to see here is that Israel actually signed and ratified, among one of the first countries that signed and ratified ICERD. But look at how they are treating the Palestinians. So this is the core issue. We cannot equate the pressure to sign an international treaty with as if we sign, the problems would be solved. We can actually address issues of discrimination locally without the need to join this international treaty, because bearing in mind, I mean, however condescending she wants to be, saying that we do not understand and so on and so forth. I mean, the opposition has always been, opposition against ICERD has always been on basis of constitution. It is not about Malay, it is not about Islam and so on, but on the sole basis on the federal constitution. It just so happened that those provision touches upon the position of the Malays and Islam. But the issue, the core issue, is not about race, it's not about religion. It's about accepting the federal constitution as the highest law. That's all. I mean, she keep on repeating, saying that
it's about racial discrimination. That's what we're talking about. So when you talk about constitution, you talk about racial issues.
I mean, when you speak,
I did not say it's not about Malays. You're talking about federal constitution with regards to Malays.
When you speak, I do not even interfere. I mean,
but don't misquote us, please.
I mean, I'm not misquoting. I mean, my position is very clear. I mean, our position is that it is the issue with ICERD is that it goes against provisions of the federal constitution. It just so happened that those provisions touches upon issues of Malay, natives of Sabah and Sarawak, Islam and so on. But it is not a racial issue. I mean, if you look at it, the federal constitution provisions from a racial lens, then the problem is not with me. The problem with you. These are constitutional issues. But if you choose to look at it from a racial lens, the problem is with you.
No, Aidil, just help me to understand your contention, right? Because you said that Article 153 is not in compliance with ICERD.
Yes.
I got it right.
Not just 153.
And the many other articles that you have listed.
Yep.
Right? It's not in compliance with ICERD. So are you saying that all this, and you know the objective of ICERD is to eliminate all forms of racial discriminations. So are you agreeing that all these articles are actually discriminatory in nature?
Now, when we talk about being discriminatory, we have to be very particular on the definition. If we are talking about discriminatory based on the definition provided under Article 1.4 of ICERD, of course it is discriminatory because it is so wide. But because it says that any distinction, Article 153, when it distinguishes between Malays and the other communities, that is already discriminatory under ICERD. But it is not a practice, a discriminatory practice that denies the right of other communities. So I would say it is a positive discrimination. In fact, we had a federal court judgment in Victoria Jaya Silan, I think several years back, where the federal court clearly pronounced that discrimination are allowed under our federal constitution, but it is not a negative discrimination, it is a positive discrimination because it distinguishes certain communities, Muslims, non-Muslims, Malays and natives Sabah and Sarawak and the other communities. So that is discrimination, but it is not a discrimination that denies the right of other communities.
So, okay, your positive discrimination, can I equate it to affirmative action?
I wouldn't quite agree with that narrative because affirmative action is where policy is imposed to help a certain segment of the society that might be backwards.
So you don't think that Article 153 of Federal Constitution is towards this objective?
I do not think so, and I have legal arguments on that. First of all, because when the Federal Constitution was drafted, we know the Raid Commission was appointed. They were given a very clear term of reference. So this term of reference, I think there were five points. So this forms the very core provisions of the Federal Constitution. So it says among the other things, common nationality, the Yang di-Pertuan Besar and so on and so forth, it says that the safeguarding of the special position of the Malays and the legitimate interests of other communities. So these were the term of reference given to the Raid Commission to propose the Federal Constitution. So how can we say that Article 153 is merely for affirmative action, that after a certain target is being achieved, it should be abolished? Policies could be affirmative action. For instance, the new economic policy, that can be called as affirmative action, and it can fall under Article 153. But Article 153 is not strictly for affirmative action. It is there because of the social contract, the agreement agreed upon, the quid pro quo. The other communities given their citizenship, so in return, they acknowledges the special position of the Malays and the natives of Sabah and Sarawak.
Well, I don't disagree that affirmative action is a policy, and the special position in for Malays and the Bumiputra rights are not necessarily a policy per se. It's a special position. But I totally disagree to suggest that 153 is a discriminatory policy which will object to the ICERD Convention, because this is precisely what we're saying. ICERD recognizes such positions, such preference, so long as it doesn't discriminate. So nobody's talking about amending the Federal Constitution. So to suggest that we hold the Federal Constitution high as if others are not doing it, that is a false narrative. And I'll say it and I'll repeat it again. Of course, the whole thing is about Federal Constitution, but this is about ratifying International Convention against racism, right? So if it is racism and racial discrimination, what are you talking about when you refer to Federal Constitution? You are talking about the special position of the Malays, the special preference of the Malays. And you are now saying we cannot sign ICERD because if you sign it, it will affect that article. That's what you're saying. If you don't say it, there's no issue, there's no conflict. But here, which is it? You refuse to say that the article in the Federal Constitution that you've listed out is actually discriminatory. So if you say it's not discriminatory, what is the problem with ICERD? If it is discriminatory, then let's talk about whether it could be reserved, or whether it has got a timeline. Those are the things that we can talk about. But you fail to show that the Federal Constitution articles are discriminatory, because it is not. And 153 especially took into account other races. So it cannot be discriminatory. Just because you have the word special position, it does not in itself become a discrimination as you claim to have in the ICERD. That's not what ICERD said. So let's not kid ourselves. At least, let's be true to what ICERD is about, and it is not. So, and you see, it's not about Malays, it's not about Islam. Look at the rally. What is the rally about? What are you all chanting about? You were chanting about Malays and the rights of Malays, Hak Melayu, and that's what everybody has been saying. So why are we pretending?
Hak Melayu is constitutional.
Correct. So why do you say we're not talking about Melayu or Islam? The argument that has been brought out to debate is that when you talk about ICERD, when you ratify ICERD, the argument against that is saying that it will affect the rights and the special position of the Malays under the Federal Constitution, which we are saying it will not affect. And you can't show the conflict because ICERD has taken into account those countries which will have special preference for ethnic. So what is the problem? And within 153 itself says there's no discrimination to others.
I mean,
why
you keep
pursuing?
You keep on repeating that I fail to show.
I'm saying if you are the proponent for not ratify.
If at all you are saying that Article 153 is in line because we have Article 114, which allows for adequate advancement. You have to show how Article 153 fulfills the exception.
No, you have to show the other way. You have to show. Those who are against ICERD are saying.
I've shown.
The question is, you are saying.
The definition. The definition is that there cannot be any distinction.
You cannot get stuck at the definition, my friend, because
the definition is the one that gives life to the other provision.
No, that definition is not the one that gives lives. You have to look at every clause because you talk about 1.4
I cannot
and
help.
you talk about 2.4. So the point is this. The question was posed to you whether 153 is discriminatory or not. And you said no.
I've answered that. I said if we look into the
where which part?
She asked me, and then I answered exactly that. I said it is discriminatory.
Where in ICERD
it is discriminatory if we look at Article 1, Clause 1, because it says that any racial discrimination shall mean any distinction.
Then go to 1.4.
And then it goes, wait. It shall mean any distinction. Article 153 clearly distinguishes.
You have to go further than that.
Allow me to finish.
Go to 1.4.
I'll let you explain on 1.4.
Yes,
allow me to finish. Okay. Now, Article 153 distinguishes between Malay, natives of Sabah and Sarawak, and the other communities. So clearly it is caught by the definition of racial discrimination.
You don't get stuck at one.
Okay, and then Article 1, Clause 1 also says that any preference, again, Article 153 is caught by this provision. Now you mentioned 1.4.
Yes.
Let me just read in full what it says. Special measures taken for the sole.
Okay, can we have 1.4 on the screen also?
Yes.
So do we have it? Oh, I'm sorry, we don't.
Okay.
Never mind. Now, special measures taken for the sole purpose of securing adequate advancement of certain racial or ethnic groups or individuals requiring such protection as may be necessary in order to ensure such groups or individuals equal enjoyment of exercise of human rights and fundamental freedoms shall not be deemed racial discrimination, provided, however, that such measures do not, as a consequence, lead to the maintenance of special rights. Separate rights for different racial groups, and that they shall not be continued after the objective for which they were taken have been achieved. So, based from this provision, there are three requirements in order for Article 153 and other provisions in the Federal Constitution to comply with the exclusion of 1.4. First, it is only allowed if it is for securing adequate advancement of certain race. These are the wordings. I'm not saying these are the wordings.
Yes.
Second is that such measures do not, as a consequence, lead to maintenance of special rights. Meaning,
Separate rights.
Yeah, separate rights. It does not. The measures does not lead to maintenance of separate rights. So what is Article 89?
Read 153.
What's Article 89? It is about Malay reserve land, only for the Malays. Is that not separate rights?
No,
What is about the native land, Sabah and Sarawak? Is that not separate right?
Look at how you read it.
If you're
look at
saying
153 and you tell me how 153 is in conflict. How?
You have not even answered my question. Article 89 on the Malay reserve land.
Tell me how. How does that?
I've said
How does
when
that
the Malay reserve land,
here?
when the Malay reserve land
Yes.
is restricted only for the Malays,
Yes.
is that not
No.
a measure that allows separate rights, maintenance of separate rights?
Come on, read it full. Read it full. Let's read it full.
I mean,
Come on.
I cannot. I mean,
why not?
I can only lead the horse to the water.
let's
if
just
you
read
refuse
it.
to drink, I can't.
No, I will not accept misinterpretation of an article. All right? Special measures taken for the sole purpose of securing adequate advancement of certain racial or ethnic groups or individuals requiring such protection as may be necessary in order to ensure such groups or individuals such enjoyment or exercise shall not deemed racial discrimination, shall not be deemed racial discrimination, provided, however, that such measures do not, as a consequence, lead to the maintenance of separate rights for different racial. Tell me how.
So tell me how Article 89.
You tell us, because you said Article 89 is in conflict. You tell us
Article
how.
89 is
How does it
restricting.
lead to separate rights for different racial groups?
Yeah,
Tell me.
I'm telling you. Article 89 is about restricting the ownership of Malay reserve land to the Malays.
Okay.
So meaning that it is giving a separate right
Okay.
to a community, to the Malay community, and it is denying the right of the other communities
How?
to have.
How? Tell me. Does that mean that non-Malays, other different racial groups, do not get to own land? Does that mean that?
They get to own land, but separate land. So this is separate rights.
Everyone owns separate land. Everyone owns separate land. Where do people own?
Under separate category.
Yeah, of
I mean,
course.
so clearly.
How does that lead? If it is a situation where non-Malays cannot own land and Malays can own land, then you can talk about it. But where? Where does it say that?
No, if that is how you read it, I cannot help you.
Okay,
Of course.
Can both of you agree that there's a different reading and interpretation?
Yeah, I think they
in
deliberately
line?
choose
You
to.
No, you have to. I mean,
you are deliberating.
No.
Refuse to see.
No, it is not. You're looking at it completely wrong.
No, I know. I understand that you're saying that it's a separate right created under Article 89. That's your position,
Yes.
right? But she doesn't agree with you because she thinks that non-Malays can also own lands. So it doesn't matter, just that we cannot own the reserve land.
Yes.
So that
It's
itself,
reserved for the Malays.
it doesn't create special rights or a separate rights. So I think we have to agree to disagree because this is a different interpretation of the law.
Yeah.
And law is always subject to interpretation. I think both of you are lawyers and this is what we have to, and I went to law school before, so I think this is what we really have to agree, that it's really a piece of thing that is subject to interpretation. So, but okay, so now I think let's come back a little bit. This, I want to address it to Latheefa because a lot of people ask, what is the benefit of rectifying ICERD? Okay, so maybe after we heard Aidil talking so much about no, it's not good to rectify ICERD from a constitution point of view, can you actually explain to our audience what is the benefit of rectifying ICERD?
Okay, but I just want to come back to the issue. Also, Israel signed ICERD and they continue. No, because they continue then to have this discrimination. Yes, but they subject themselves to the international court. Because they signed it, you can drag them to court. And that is why, when it comes to testing ICERD, the first country that is actually that have lodged and filed a complaint against the breach of ICERD is Palestine against Israel.
Actually, Israel reserved Article 22 on subjecting
Yes,
themselves.
yes, that's the point. So the countries can reserve it, but the point is this: why did then Israel sign it when it has got a clear-cut discrimination, right? Because it wants to be part of the international community. Because if you want to trade with the EU, with any other countries, you have to have a certain standard. If you're North Korea, then we have we want to trade with you, we would have a problem. So same as other countries, whether it's Turkey, you want to be part of a community, you have to have a certain standard. So the more conventions that you sign, the higher your standard is when it comes to, in the eyes of international community. You want to be leading on issues, you are sitting on councils, you're part of the Security Council, and all these things will come into play. So here, I never, and I don't think anybody said that by ratifying everything solves. No, that's ridiculous, all right? But it's a step towards the right thing to do. And the right thing to do is always the right thing to do. So there's no such thing as we have this federal constitution and everything is fine. That's not the case either. We have the federal constitution, but there's breaches of human rights anyway. We have breaches of people's rights to freedom of expression anyway. We have those rights. So similarly, when you go to international community, you don't take the federal constitution and say we have the federal constitution, which is not adhered or signed on or ratified by other community, other countries. So you don't take the federal constitution in the international world. You take ICERD. You be part of that. So what are we talking about? We are rejecting racial discrimination. Nothing else, racial discrimination. And that principle, it may sound cliche, but that principle is an accepted principle by any culture, any tradition, any civilized world. To go against racial discrimination, to fight against racial discrimination, it's a civilized thing to do. And to come out and shout at it as if it's a dirty word, which is what they successfully have done. Nobody understood ICERD, and not only it was not understood, it was not translated, it was given a wrong interpretation, and it became a bad word. And it's shocking when you go overseas and people talk about it. Why are you against it? Why are you against it? Because we are special. And how? How does it conflict? We can never explain ourselves. And this is the problem that we are facing. So how did people, what is the benefit is that we want to take Malaysia a step up so that we are respected and we are seen as a leader in the international community. And if you do not sign, you have no moral authority to do so. And that is why when it comes to, say, the issue of Rohingya, the issue of Israel, or any other minority discrimination, where is your moral authority in speaking? Can you be part of it? It's going to be difficult. That is why if Israeli signed it, you hold them to it. We're not saying just because Israel signed it, therefore what's the point, right? So it's the same thing. If people say, we have the federal constitution, what's the point? You can't still rally or speak. That's how people used to be talking, but that's not the point. The point is there is a standard you want to hold to, and that is what we are pushing for.
Okay. There's another opposition stance taken in terms of ICERD, where we will be subjecting ourselves to the international jurisdiction, where we actually, because you are going to be subjected to the committee and all this thing, therefore losing somehow your sovereignty. What's your take on this?
Not at all. International law, unlike local law or what you call the national laws, it is convention. It is not law in a sense where when you breach, you are then subjected to punishment. It doesn't work that way. So the concept or the principles of international law is such that it's what you call that, it's an obligation or treaty. But if you allow yourself to be part of a party to be subjected to the International Court of Justice, yes. But countries breach ICERD or any other international law forever. I mean, they've been doing it all the time. But it takes to a level of seriousness, and whether a country is being brought to the international court, this is where the issue comes to. But it's certainly not an obligation like a national law. And you are the country that deals with it, because once you sign the treaty and ratify it, then you are the one who will be bringing it to your local law and how you are going to administer it. So you take it and you do it. So it's not an international body per se that is going to ensure whether you follow or not. It's you. So if Malaysia ratifies CEDAW, the laws of Malaysia cannot be in conflict with CEDAW. Right? So how do you then say that if there is a breach, your sovereignty doesn't get affected? You make sure that your laws and legislations are in line with CEDAW. That is how the laws are. And so if there is a conflict, because Malaysia ratified, you can take it up to court and say that you have to, the standard of the laws must be the same. And that is why there are certain reservation in CEDAW, because you cannot align or what you call uniform the law as the local law. So there is a reservation. There are also the Convention on Rights of Children, in which we have signed, and almost every country except a few that have not signed the Convention on Rights of Children. But there's a lot of reservation, rights to the rights of the freedom of religion for the child, rights of citizenship for the child, rights of free education. Those we have not agreed to, so we reserved it, because if you do sign it, then you are obliged to make laws which matches that. So that is why there has been a reservation to that. So for me, same to ICERD, which is far less controversial than CEDAW or CRC or any other international treaty. It's far less controversial. But for some strange reason, it has been twisted in such a manner that we have failed to see what is actually ICERD about. And until today, so-called experts who are against ICERD claim this is what ICERD is about, this is what ICERD is about. But the reality is, why don't you just go clause by clause and look at all the articles and tell us how is it discriminatory? And please, when you say positive discrimination, it's discrimination which is not what is anticipated by ICERD. That is not what ICERD is talking about. Positive discrimination in itself is not the issue. It's in exercising a positive discrimination, would that discriminate other races is what the issue is about. So who are the so-called victims when Article 89, for example, or any other article, UITM, for example, are these is it discriminating other races? Are non-Malay child or non-Bumiputra child deprived of going to school or education? That is not the case. So it is not right to say, because of all this, because this is what the flyers are talking about. Those who are pushing for the rally has said, you will lose MARA, you will lose all the special position, you will talk about, every single special rights or privilege or what that is perceived only for the Malays or the Bumiputra, they said will be crossed out if you sign ICERD. That is not the case. That is not what ICERD is about. So for me, while I repeatedly say ICERD is not something which we say by signing it, it solves everything. But by stepping forward and going towards the right thing, I think we are on the right track. We are moving towards that.
Do you have anything to respond?
I mean, I don't know where to begin, but let me just begin. I mean, signing ICERD does not put our country better. I mean, Israel have been signing. It does not make Israel better in the eyes of the world. So that is a false argument to say that if you sign, then we can join the international community. It does not solve. I mean, other Islamic countries, Egypt and so on, Pakistan, they signed, but are they better in terms of human rights positions? They are not. I mean, we should solve our issues locally, not by looking at the international convention, knowing full well. I mean, if the conventions are not against the provisions of federal constitution, I'm fine with it. But knowing full well, I mean, despite the fact that Latheefa refused to acknowledge But knowing full well that they are against many provisions. I've shown, but she refused to acknowledge, then I can't
You've not
help.
shown.
I can't help.
You've listed, but you've not shown.
So, knowing full well, it does not put our human rights record any better. But if we are serious about addressing human rights issues, then we should address it locally. What should we do? We had, I think, several years back, 2 landmark cases. One is Air Asia against one of these stewardess. I couldn't recall her name. Air Asia, where the court says that fundamental liberties, rights that are accorded under the federal constitution are not applicable against private entities, because the stewardess were pregnant, so she was terminated. She claimed she was discriminated being a woman, so she sued. And then the court says that fundamental liberties are only applicable against public institutions, not private entities like Air Asia. And then there was another case, Malaysia Airlines, the same judgment. So what we need to do is we need to enact at the local level anti-discriminatory laws, not by signing ICERD. It does not solve this problem. I mean, signing ICERD creates further problem, because now we have problems with Article 89, Article 90, Article 153. We have all sorts of problems. So rather than creating further problem, we should actually address the real issues, the discriminatory practices faced by Muslims who couldn't, Muslim men who couldn't perform Friday prayers because of their employers does not allow. The discriminatory practices of employers who does not allow women to wear hijab. These are issues that we can address at the local level without the need to sign ICERD. So I don't see why we need to sign this convention.
Certainly, I don't see where what has a stewardess suing the what you call the airline industry or whatever has got to do anything with the issue that we're talking about. Who is stopping anyone on pushing these anti-discriminatory laws? Who is it? What is stopping? Nobody is stopping. But that doesn't stop your talk and your role in the international community, unless you're talking about you being part of an isolated country. What has anything got to do with Friday discrimination? If you have a problem and your employee are not allowed to go on Friday prayers, by all means, go and deal with it. Who is saying otherwise? Who is saying otherwise by signing?
Exactly. What I'm saying is that
there's no connection on the issue.
No, exactly. What I'm saying is that because you were saying by signing ICERD,
I never said that. I never said that we'll go back better.
I haven't even finished.
But you repeated it. You're repeating it.
You were saying that by signing ICERD, we are joining the international community in the eyes of the world, that our human rights record
No, I didn't say
better.
human rights. I said moral authority. I did not use the word our human rights record will be up. Are
you saying by not signing ICERD, we do not have the moral authority
you
to
have lesser
address
moral authority when it comes to dealing with issues of international
why
community?
do we have lesser authority? I mean, we should address the real issues, as I
The
mentioned.
issue is not limited to Malaysia alone. When you are talking about, say, for example, Israel, when you're talking about Rohingya, when you're talking about minority discrimination around the world, if you have not signed the ICERD, what moral authority do you have when you go over there and bang table and say how unfair it is? Where is your moral authority?
I mean, we still have the moral authority.
Where? How?
I mean,
that's hypocrisy at its best.
First of all, we must understand that if we want to address discriminatory practices, we can always address it at other platforms. I mean, ICERD is not the only platform. We have
Show me which other platform.
We have UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. We can address
what
those
is
issues.
UPR?
I mean, let me just give you an example.
If you don't sign ICERD, there is nothing to review in your performance when it comes to discrimination.
No, first of all, UPR is not concerned only with ICERD.
Of course.
In the UPR, you can raise any human rights issue.
You are subjected to those that you have. Listen, when you talk about CEDAW, when you talk about CRC, when it comes to Universal Periodic Review, they will ask you what is your level of adherence to these conventions.
Unfortunately, that is not so. I mean, I went to Geneva in earlier last month for the UPR. I mean, that is not how it is. I mean, every country has the right to raise a recommendation to the state, we would still have the right to raise
Who's
issues.
stopping that?
I mean, so without even having to sign the ICERD. You were saying that if we don't sign ICERD, I mean, we cannot raise. I mean, that is ridiculous.
That's not the point. You said we have other platforms. We have UPR. How can you talk about UPR when you don't sign ICERD? What has that got to do with UPR? UPR is a completely different.
You were saying
different strategy, different platform on
if we
different
don't,
issues.
No, I'm answering your question. You're saying
If you brought the issue UPR.
If we don't sign ICERD, we cannot raise issues of discrimination.
I say you have no moral authority to raise it. You can raise it, but they will ask you what moral authority you have to raise issues of minority discrimination in other countries when you have not signed ICERD. Where is your moral authority? Of course you can raise, but you'll be mocked.
Unless if we are actually discriminating at the local level, then I would agree. We do not have the moral authority.
So we're not discriminating.
Rohingya wouldn't have. Myanmar wouldn't have the moral authority to raise the issues of discrimination.
So you agree we are not discriminating, right?
I mean, we are not discriminating.
Correct. So why not sign ICERD?
No, because we are not discriminating if we use the definition under the provision.
You're
we are
talking about Rohingya. You said we have the moral authority because we are not doing any discrimination. Myanmar has, right? That's what you're saying.
You are running away from the argument.
No,
you were saying
we talk about moral authority.
Let me just finish, because you were saying that if we do not sign ICERD, we do not have moral authority. You were saying that.
Yes.
I am saying that no, even without signing ICERD, because Article 21 clearly says that all nations are free to denounce. So even without signing ICERD, we still have the right to raise issues. But we would lose that moral authority if our national record says that we actually discriminate by denying the rights of others. Then we would lose that.
So did we do that? Did we do that?
But what you said, by merely not signing, so we do not. That is
no
false.
moral authority.
That is a false
when
argument.
You refuse to sign.
I'm so sorry.
ICERD.
I really have to interfere at this point of time because we will be beating around the bushes. Both of you are taking a total different stance. You are saying that we have no moral authority if we do not sign ICERD, whereas you
on the issues of racial discrimination.
On the issues of racial discrimination, whereas you think that we can deal with the issues of racial discrimination if we do it on the ground, like having an anti-discriminatory law. So I think we are pretty clear on that. So I would actually like to address the issue of moral authority. That would actually bring us back to another point, which maybe we can discuss, whether there is discriminatory or not in this country, especially in particular with racial discrimination. Okay, so time and again, Aidil, you have actually used or raised that the federal constitution in your contention or in your argument. I think nobody is going to challenge you on the federal constitution being the supreme law of the land. But you would have to admit that the federal constitution is subject to amendment, and it has been amended, right? So when we come into this few section, and I think which we talk about setting a limitation on certain rights or preferences under ICERD, Article 1.4. Do you think that it's not possible that the Article 153 has a time limit?
I wouldn't agree to that. I mean, there has been argument saying that it has a time limit, 15 years after
upon the Merdeka.
Yeah. But that is not, I mean, the record shows otherwise, actually. Of course, there were recommendations made by the Red Commission that says that
it has to be reviewed.
It has to be reviewed after 15 years. But actually, that recommendation goes against the very term of reference, the very power given to them to propose. There is another record. I mean, during the course of negotiating what are the provisions should be in the federal constitution, there were hearings conducted by council on behalf of the Malay rulers. So, if I can just read, because this shows that those provisions are meant to be in perpetuity.
Okay.
So these were the representation made by the council for the Majlis Raja-Raja then. So it says that relating to emergency conditions and safeguarding of the special position of the Malays and the legitimate interests of other communities. Referring back to the original terms of reference of the Commission, one sees something like a perpetuation of part of Clause 19 it was referring to clause 19 of the Federation Agreement, 1948. Relating to the position of their highnesses and relating to the safeguarding of the special position of the Malays and the legitimate interests of other communities. So that the word perpetuation was used there. It was meant to be there and to remain there.
Section 19 of the 1948 agreement.
Yeah. I mean, this was discussing the special position of the Malays in the course of drafting the federal constitution. So that is one. Secondly, even if I do not agree with the argument that says that Article 153 would have a certain period of time where it should, I wouldn't agree with that. But even if one would to agree with such an argument, then how do you argue on Article 89 on the Malay Reserve Land? Are there any limitation on Article 89? Article 90 on the Malay holdings, and all other articles on the native land and so on. So those do not have any time limitation, and it perpetually creates separate rights, which does not go hand in hand with Article 1 of ICERD.
And also 1.4 of ICERD?
Yeah, and also Article 1.4 of ICERD.
That's your point.
But that is not to say that those articles discriminates other communities in such a way that denies them their right. They give them their right, but it simply distinguishes between the communities.
I also don't agree that there's a need for an amendment of 153. For me, 153, there's no need for amendment because 153 is a reasonable article which talks about special position of the Malays and Bumiputra. But within that article, of course, there's no time limit, but it also recognizes to make sure that other communities or other races are not deprived of their rights. So that is quite clear. So for me, there is no need to actually talk about amendment of 153. And the law is quite clear because this special position is of the Malays and Bumiputra is given to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The power to ensure these rights and position is to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So for me, that is not a problem. And within that Article 153, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong may, in order to ensure the reservation to Malays and natives, he may come out with special quotas, special laws, grant permits. That is where the discretion is given to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, in exercising the special position and Malay rights, can allow special quota, license, permits, whatever. But in doing so, it is taken into account that he shall not deprive any person. That means other races or other non-Malays or non-Bumiputras will be deprived. So within that context, this is not a discriminatory clause which ICERD is talking about. In fact, it takes into account, in 1.4 it takes into account, because it is not just Malaysia. Any other country has got various forms of special rights or special position given to a certain community. And the way it is conducted, it's always to make sure that that particular community is brought forward. But while doing so, it doesn't mean others will be deprived. And that is for Native Americans or any other countries, special certain groups are given that particular thing. So for me, I don't see why there needs to be an amendment. And that's precisely why, because there's no need for amendment, we are saying it's not in conflict of the ICERD clause, and therefore there is no reason why ICERD should not be ratified.
So in your contention, it is the Yang di-Pertuan Agong who has the discretion to decide when...
He has the power and discretion. Because the reference in 153 is to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The power is given to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So for me, all these issues, we see the federal constitution in itself, when it comes to these issues, are actually quite complete. The problem that we are really seriously dealing with is when the leaders of the previous government have manipulated and wrongfully referred and claim that they are following the constitution when they discriminate other races. This is the problem that we are facing. What we are facing is complete breach of the constitution. So many minorities have been discriminated. We can see people who have been, deprived of their basic rights, fundamental rights, in breach of the federal constitution. So it is not because of the existence of the clause, but it is because of the lack of respect and the manipulation when there was a time when the media will only play the issues that is raised by the government before this. Barisan Nasional, which is purely racial, the way it is done, they are the ones who have forever used the word Ketuanan Melayu, and for me, that doesn't exist in the Constitution. The word Ketuanan Melayu doesn't exist in the Constitution. And special position of Malays and Bumiputra is not Ketuanan Melayu. There is a big difference. And for those who are pretending that it's in the Constitution, show us where it is.
I'm not interested to talk about politics.
No.
I mean,
it is about politics. It is about politics. It's about government and governance. And so, for me, there are discrimination. In this country, there are discrimination. And a lot of minorities have faced discrimination. There's no doubt about it.
I agree about that.
Let me finish why I'm saying it. Because the discrimination is not because they are following the federal constitution, but in fact, they are in breach of the constitution. So to say that our federal constitution is perfect, no issue. Of course, you can amend. But for me, 153 and those things are not an issue. But the laws have been used and manipulated and misinterpreted to give the impression that all these discriminatory policies were under the so-called 153.
Okay, are you done?
Which is not true. No, I'm not done yet. So the point, what I'm saying is that for me, it's not an issue about amendment. We will not be trapped in trying to discuss an amendment of 153. That is what exactly everyone wants to talk about, because it is seen as sensitive, and when you talk about amendment, that means you are going to stop that position, which is not the case. So let's not get trapped into a debate which is not there. The issue is this: are there discrimination in this country? Yes. Are there policies, are there rights guaranteed in the federal constitution? Yes. So we're talking about just because you sign, just because you have a federal constitution, doesn't mean there's no breaches. It's how you deal with it. It's how you keep, without the federal constitution, without the guarantees, how are you going to fight for your rights? These are the things that stemmed from there. So those who are discriminated can fight for it because there is a standard that is given. That's the point that we're dealing with.
Okay, I mean, I'm not interested to jump into political issues. I mean, the UMNO and so on. I mean, if Latheefa wants to say that UMNO is, first of all, I'm not a fan of Barisan. I mean, but be that as it may, I mean, acknowledging that Barisan indeed is a race-based party. I mean, we look at the election of DAP or in Selangor. I mean, not a single Malay was elected. I mean, that is for you to say that Barisan is and then, but Pakatan is also race based.
From DAP.
I mean, I'm saying Pakatan is also race based. So that is clear. I mean, PKR is with a coalition with DAP. So it's hypocrisy to say that. I mean, I would say that those from Pakatan does not have the moral authority to say that Barisan is race based.
I'm not talking about race-based. I'm talking about racial discriminatory policies.
Yeah.
That's the difference between race-based parties. That is not the issue. It's whether they have committed racial discrimination. That's what I'm talking about.
And
that's the difference.
With regards to racial policies and so on, I would agree. I mean, there are indeed discriminatory practices done by the previous government that I'm hoping to see that the current government could actually address. I mean, one that I mentioned just now were on the practice of wearing hijab. That is one. I mean, but that is by private entities. And then we must also acknowledge that discrimination actually does also being perpetuated by the government. For instance, let me just see. I mean, for the UPR, the recent UPR, I mean, CLJ submitted our report on discrimination to the human rights in Geneva. So I'll just read from the report. The segregation is not only confined among students but also teachers, where the Malaysian government seems to encourage segregation based on ethnicity. That teachers of the Malay race were not to teach children in the Mandarin National Type Schools. On April 20th, 2017, Deputy Education Minister Chong Sin Woon was reported to have said that Malay teachers will not be sent to Chinese schools to teach. I mean, these are Malay teachers who were trained in China and Taiwan to be well versed in the Mandarin language, but because of the opposition by the Chinese parents, so they say we do not want Malay teachers. So the government then agreed with the objection and said that Malay teachers, even when they are qualified in the Mandarin language, they would not be sent to teach the children in Chinese schools. So this is clear discrimination.
Whose government is that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm not from Barisan. I'm not a fan of Barisan. What I'm saying is that there were discriminatory practices, I would agree, by the previous government that is yet to be addressed by the current government. I would like to see the current government to address this issue of discrimination by actually enacting laws, as I mentioned, of anti-discriminatory laws. Not by joining some convention which would not address the issue, because it would create more problem. It goes against, as I wouldn't want to list it again, it goes against various provisions of the federal constitution. So rather than looking at the something that we cannot reach because it is against constitution, we should actually amend our laws, enact new laws that can actually address these issues. It affects so many people. I mean, the discriminatory practices of banning hijab among women employees. This affects so many, because let me just give you an example. In UiTM, there is a course for the hotel industry. So every semester there are thousands of students. Among them are Muslim women. So when they graduate, they couldn't find job. They are being systematically discriminated. But the government is not doing anything. I mean, I heard that the government is working on enacting. We are hoping to see.
Why are they being denied jobs?
Because in order for them to secure that job, they are required to remove their hijab. So that is a systemic discrimination. So we do not need ICERD in order for us to address these issues.
Nobody said we need ICERD to address those issues.
Exactly.
Nobody said ICERD was for that issue. Who is stopping anybody from dealing with those issues? So it's not an A or B situation. It's not a black and white situation.
Come on. I gave you leeway for you to
It's not about you giving me leeway. So you have an answer, you deal with it. But why do you say things which is
my
not
argument
there?
is simple. I mean, we have something for us to address. Serious issue that affects thousands of students every semester, and yet we are looking at something that is so abstract that and in fact it would go against many provisions of the constitution. Why are we not addressing the real issues?
Okay, since we are on a topic of discrimination and you have raised some scenarios, I would like to raise some scenarios as well, because you might not be aware of this. It's among the Chinese community. Many times, especially in a year during the results of STPM or the result of SPM, we will see very high achievers who cannot get into the choice of universities, and we know that this is because of the quota system that is being implemented. This is a case where us, or when I say us, I'm referring to the Chinese community, have to be much more hardworking. We have to put much more effort. To you guys, is this justice, or is this equality, or is this something that we have to address? I would like to know, and I think a lot of my audience would like to know too. I hope both of you can give me an answer. I don't know, maybe Latheefa, you can say.
Totally. I agree that universities should not deprive students who are qualified to go into the university and discriminate them just because of their race. And then that I totally agree that it's about time we change those policies. And
so
that
this is
it's not in breach of 153.
You don't think it's in breach of 153?
No, it's not in breach of. You see, that's why there is the idea of quota system and policies and affirmative action, like you say. So, for example, UITM has got basically there is no opening. They allow foreign students to be there, a very, very small, minuscule thing. But whenever the issue of Malay rights or issues which evolve about equal treatment to other races comes about, one of the first thing that comes about in protecting is that, oh, you're going to open up UITM, you're going to allow non-Malays there as if it's a bad thing, right? And these kind of issues are where it is in your face, saying a big group of people will say, what is wrong with mixing? But another group will say, by doing that, you are going to take away the rights of the Malays. This is the debate that we are constantly talking about. So for me, it is unfair that a lot of, if it is about a case where poor Malay kids and poor Chinese kids or poor Indian kids are performing and they are not able to go in, and in that context, the Malay kid gets in because of the background or whatever, that's not a problem. But where if it's an anak datuk, for example, or an anak Tan Sri, or an anak UMNO leader or whatever, gets it by virtue of the race, but not by virtue of qualification, and deprives that poor Chinese kid or the poor Indian kid, that is injustice in your face. So for me, that one has to be addressed. And I think a lot of people, and a lot of people are questioning that, and I think it's about time we can talk about it. And I believe that the PH government is talking about it. I'm not a spokesperson. I'm not a part of the establishment. But what I'm saying is that this is where we get confused with what is in the Constitution and what is being practiced. And of course, the PH government has just come in, and the Universal Periodical Review on issues, we're talking about the previous policies, and whether the policies have changed is another issue. And if they're striving to do that, that's very good. And if they're not, they should be criticized. And I think the government should be criticized on so many issues, actually. In fact, they've not resolved so many things. My point is this. There are clear-cut discrimination, whether it's in the civil service, whether it's about promotion, whether, all these things, there are clear-cut discrimination based on race. And how do we deal with it? Whether it's very serious or not is the issue. And how do we deal with it? And that's where we have to discuss. And I agree, when a party is a racially based party, it makes it all the more harder. So we should do away with racially based politics. But whether they are going towards it, that's another thing that we need to deal with. But yes, that fact, especially for not just Chinese community, I would say non-Chinese community, who are deprived because of that. And whether the thousands of young Malay girls who are wearing hijab is discriminated, I don't know what is the scale. But I agree, if they are discriminated because of their, that should be an issue. And in fact, I would have expected them to go on the street. Who's stopping them from bringing the issue? Have they ever complained? Have they brought it up? I think they have. There were issues and uproar before the previous government. The issue was raised. So let's not confuse what is happening in the private sector and what is happening at the state and how the policies are being allowed. So whenever a private company does a discriminatory practice, you can deal with it in so many ways. You can go to the industrial court and you can actually argue it out, and you can get rights based through the industrial court and industrial relations. So I don't see where you are deprived in that sense.
It is not sufficient.
If it is not sufficient,
the landmark decisions.
If it is not sufficient, it can be dealt with. But what is practiced by the private company, so if it's not in line,
it can be dealt with at the local level.
Yeah, what is the issue?
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying you are being ridiculous to say that the ICERD and this hijab discrimination is something which is, who is saying that we have to sign first ICERD before we deal with hijab? Nobody's saying it. So that is a false debate. That's a false argument. Nobody's talking about that. So it's just like, let's deal with this issue before we talk about it. there are so many things that is going parallel. There's so many levels, there's so many ministries, so many issues. Not every single minister is sitting there and talking about ICERD. There are other things that's going on. So to be obsessed with ICERD as if because of ICERD the country is not running, it's ridiculous. Where is that coming from? So for you to keep racing and obsessing about hijab as if that is the most important issue right now in the country which is not addressed because of ICERD, that is a false argument.
I did not say that.
So you gave example of the hijab,
No, I was saying,
and I'm talking about.
I was saying
I
that,
can give you hundreds of examples
I was
of
saying
discrimination.
that we should address the more serious issue.
Nobody said you shouldn't.
Something that we could achieve. I was saying
Nobody's
that.
saying you shouldn't.
Yeah.
So what is the point? What is the point of bringing up something which we didn't say you
cannot? The point I'm
cannot?
saying is that signing ICERD does not solve anything.
Nobody said that's the point. Nobody said signing ICERD solves
So
everything.
if it does not solve the problem, so why do we need ICERD?
Signing ICERD does not solve the problem of hijab.
So it does not solve the problem of discrimination.
Of course, it goes towards the level you want to solve the problem of racial discrimination. You sign up to a standard we're talking about.
I mean,
Just because I sign ICERD doesn't mean this problem is solved. Just because you have federal constitution doesn't mean there's no breach. That's the point.
Can I address your question on article because you were mentioning about high achievers? I mean, I would totally agree. I mean, I was a student once. I mean, I could totally understand that. However, we have to look at the. I'm not sure about what are the surrounding the full facts about it. But if, for instance, the high achiever is actually the top high achiever, and then he or she does not get a place simply because being a Chinese, then I would agree that is discriminatory, that is unfair, that is unjust. But if he is among one of the high achievers among the others, for instance, there are thousands high achievers, and then he is just one from the many. And then because of the quota, he couldn't get a place because there are other high achievers that are better than him. Then I think that is based on merit for his community. I mean, we have to comply with Article 153, where the YDPA has the duty to actually safeguard the rights of the Malays and natives of Sabah and Sarawak. So I would agree if it is something that we need to address, if the discrimination is against the top high achiever, still
within that community only.
Within that community.
So it's only within the Chinese or the non-Muslim, the non-Malay communities, if he or she is a high achiever and if she performs better in her exam. Is that your contention?
Yes.
Okay.
Likewise, I would still say it is unfair if among the Malay community, a high achiever does not get a place. Instead, somebody which is not as good as him gets a place. That is unfair. So the issue is merit based on the community. That is how I look at it. Because if you look at Article 153, it is the maintenance of quota.
So in your scenario, when I'm saying maybe the high achiever in the Malay community is performing lesser than this high achiever from the Chinese community, but he or she can still get into
based on the quota. So that is exactly what I understand from the provision of Article 153. The Malay and natives of Sabah and Sarawak, they would have to be rated based on their performance among their community. Likewise, the Chinese, the Indian, and so on.
Okay. So just now I noticed that when Latheefa mentioned that Ketuanan Melayu is not in the federal constitution itself, you had some expression. Do you want to address that?
That is exactly the moment where I felt. I mean, I do not want to delve into political issues. I mean,
let's not do it politically.
Yeah,
I think let's talk about Ketuanan Melayu, whether it is in the federal constitution from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Ketuanan Melayu has been politicized by UMNO leaders. I mean, of course, some of them are corrupt. And unfortunately, so it has been somewhat bad word by the PH supporters. But the idea, the very concept of Ketuanan Melayu is not Malay supremacy. It is being wrongly translated into Malay supremacy. It is Malay custodianship based on the principle of the Raja-Raja Melayu. I mean, the Raja-Raja Melayu, the YDPA, are they not the tuans of this country? So that is how I see it. For us, I mean, for the politicians, let them. That's their job. I mean, they politicize issues. The ketuanan Melayu dipijak and so on and so forth, and then they understand it in the wrong way. I mean, for me, reading the constitution, the concept of ketuanan Melayu is Malay custodianship. Is where we acknowledge the Raja-Raja Melayu and also the YDPA.
Okay, I think we have both heard the contention of, the proponent of ICERD and opposing ICERD, because it has been more than 1.5 hours. It's really exceeded.
Oh my God.
We had a very heated, very interesting conversation, discussion, or argument, what you would say. But I like to conclude this discussion today. But I have a question from the audience. Actually, he asked it long time ago. Let's see. I think it would be much more... maybe I have to clarify. Aidil, so your stance now is no way to ICERD.
Yeah, no
Totally
way.
no to ICERD, right?
Because reservation is not possible.
So because this audience, Dexter Chan, he asks, what are the preconditions if the government were to rectify ICERD in future? We know that the stance now is that the status now is the government is not going to rectify it. So do you think that, if there is a precondition,
we would have to change our constitution. The Article 153, before we want to amend the constitution, we would have to get the approval of the Majlis Raja-Raja. So before we could do that, we have to go through the process.
So you have to go through the process, and then we talk about the precondition, then only then rectifying ICERD.
Yeah.
That's
because the principle of international law is that pacta sunt servanda, that you cannot go into a treaty unless you know full well that you will fulfill the obligations. If you know you cannot fulfill, then you should not go into the treaty.
But then you are allowed to have reservations.
Yes.
But as I said, the very Article 20 does not allow reservation if it goes against the object and purpose of the treaty. So if we were to reserve Article 1, 1 Clause 1, which defines discrimination, that was the point of ratifying. Article 1 is the provision that gives life to other provision, because only then could you define what discrimination is. So if you reserve the definition, what's the point?
Okay, I think we have noted.
Okay.
We have noted the stance. And for Latheefa, I know you are saying that we are ready now to sign ICERD, anytime rectify ICERD. But do you think there should be a precondition if we were?
As I said, there is no clear contradiction between 153 and 14 or Article 1, the whole of ICERD. They fail to show. You keep saying there is a contradiction, but what is the contradiction is not clear. You keep saying it, but it's not clear. And what does pacta sunt servanda? What does that mean? It basically means if you are going to sign a contract or a treaty, then you must adhere by it. But the principles to sign a treaty internationally, you have the concept of reservation and discussion and debate, and then you go through this process. So by quoting Latin words to make it sound like this is something new, it goes to any treaty. It's not just ICERD. Any treaty, there is processes. And if you're prepared to go and sign a treaty, of course you must respect it. But whether you're allowed to reserve, yes, of course you're allowed to reserve. But what is it you're going to reserve? You have to be clear. So for me, so far, 153 is not in contradiction with ICERD, so I don't see any problem. So it's not about precondition as such, but of course, if you are having an apartheid policy and then you want to sign ICERD, you better get rid of apartheid policy before you come to the table to discuss on ICERD. But everyone is saying we don't have discriminatory policy under the Federal Constitution. We're not racist, we're not racial. So if you're not, why do you have a problem going to the table to discuss about ICERD? Why not? So this is where the issue is. So if Malaysia goes there and say, we want to sign ICERD, we want to be part of the international obligation, and there will be other countries who will say, I'm sorry, you can't sign ICERD because you have 153, you have Article 89. That's when the discussion starts. Not you yourself say, we cannot sign because we have the so-called, it makes no sense for me that you want to be part of a higher standard, but you go you're saying that we have it, we can't sign. This is where the problem is. Let them say that we have, and then we talk about reservation after that. But that we haven't even stepped one step for that issue. So we keep saying there's a contradiction. We must amend the federal constitution. How do you amend the federal constitution? Tell me what is the issue. Where is it that you want to say that it needs to be amended? We're still not clear about that. No one from those who are proposing that we not sign have ever come out to say that you need to amend. What exactly are you going to amend? It's not there.
Okay, I think we can safely conclude that Latheefa is not convinced that the opposition of ICERD has actually convinced her whatever proposition that they have. But I'm sure that Aidil, you would have said that you have already listed out, or you have already laid out all your arguments against ICERD. We would have to end this because we have to agree to disagree at some point of time in life, most of the time. Okay, thank you so much, both. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. It's a close to 2 hours discussion live. You can continue to watch this show, or you can share it with your friends through our YouTube channel. So follow us on our YouTube if you would like to see much of this kind of discussion with us on the hot seat. Good night. Thank you.
Wow.